The night was calm, yet something in the air felt heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alexander Reed, a man whose name echoed across boardrooms and glossy magazines, had everything that money could buy: luxury, recognition, power. Yet in the quiet moments, when the city lights dimmed and his penthouse windows reflected only his own face, he carried the weight of something money could never touch: regret. It was on one of those ordinary evenings when he chose to step away from his chauffeured car and walk the crowded streets that life decided to whisper a reminder of a past he had buried deep. He stopped in front of a small cafe, more out of habit than hunger, when his eyes caught something that froze him in place. A young girl, perhaps no more than 10, was laughing with a woman who sat across from her. Her laughter was light, the kind that carried innocence and warmth into the cold air. But Alexander's gaze was not on her smile, it was on the silver bracelet that clung to her small wrist, glinting under the streetlights. His heart tightened. That bracelet wasn't just any trinket. Years ago, he had chosen it carefully, engraved with delicate patterns, and gifted it to the only woman he had ever truly loved. She had walked away, leaving behind unanswered questions and a wound that no success had ever healed. Seeing it now, on the wrist of a girl he had never met, was like stepping into a dream he couldn't quite explain. He wanted to look away, to dismiss it as coincidence, but the details wouldn't let him. The design was too rare, the story behind it too personal. His mind raced. Could this be the same bracelet? And if it was, what did it mean? The woman sitting with the child turned her head, and though the years had etched subtle lines on her face, Alexander recognized her instantly. His breath caught. Claire. The name echoed in his chest like a whisper from another lifetime. She was the woman who had once held his heart and shattered it with her departure. Seeing her now, not across a ballroom filled with glamour, but in a modest cafe, stirred emotions he thought were long dead. He felt an ache, part disbelief, part longing, part fear. She looked different, older perhaps, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes he hadn't remembered before. And the little girl beside her, could she be? The thought was too wild, too dangerous, yet the resemblance was undeniable. The curve of her smile, the sparkle in her eyes, he had seen echoes of them before. For the first time in years, Alexander felt powerless. His world, built on control and careful choices, tilted on its axis. He found himself stepping closer, almost against his own will. Each step carried the weight of memories he had locked away, the nights spent dreaming of a future that never came, the silence that followed her leaving, the questions that haunted him even in his victories. The little girl noticed him first. She tilted her head, curious, her small hand brushing over the bracelet as if to remind him it was real. Alexander forced a smile, though his heart raced. "That's a beautiful bracelet you have," he said gently, his voice trembling in ways he didn't intend. Her mother looked up then, and the moment their eyes met, time seemed to collapse. Claire's expression shifted: shock, recognition, and something unspoken flickered in her gaze. She pressed her lips together, as if holding back words that wanted to escape. "Thank you," the girl replied, her voice clear and bright. "My mom says it's special. She told me someone gave it to her a long time ago." Alexander's chest tightened at her words. A long time ago. He could almost hear the echo of that day, when he had placed the bracelet on Claire's wrist with trembling hands, believing it symbolized a promise that would last forever. The cafe around them blurred into insignificance. For Alexander, the world had narrowed to the three of them: the woman who once defined his heart, the child who carried hints of a mystery, and himself standing at the edge of something he could neither predict nor control. Claire's voice finally broke the silence, low and cautious. "Alexander, I didn't expect." She stopped, glancing at the girl beside her, then back at him. Neither did he. He hadn't expected his past to step into the present so vividly, nor the feelings to return with such force. The ache of betrayal, the warmth of old love, the haunting question of why. And yet, beneath it all, something unexpected stirred, a fragile spark of hope, the kind that whispered of second chances. Even after years of silence, he stood there, torn between walking away to protect the fragile balance of their lives and staying to confront the truth that had lived in shadows for too long. The bracelet glimmered again under the lights, like a silent witness to their history, as if reminding him that some stories don't truly end, they wait, hidden in time, until the moment they are ready to be told. And in that instant, Alexander knew his life was about to change forever. The night after that encounter, Alexander could hardly sleep. His penthouse, usually a sanctuary of silence and control, felt suffocating, every corner echoing with memories he had buried years ago. The bracelet kept flashing in his mind, shimmering like a beacon in the darkness. He had built his empire on logic, careful decisions, and unshakable discipline. Yet one glimpse of Claire, and the child had unraveled him in ways he couldn't understand. By morning, the city moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but Alexander could not. He replayed every detail of the cafe scene, Claire's startled eyes, the girl's innocent smile, and that bracelet glinting against her wrist. He wondered if Claire thought of him all these years, or if he had become nothing more than a ghost from her past. More than that, he wondered about the child. Who was she? Why did she wear something that had once symbolized a promise of forever between him and Claire? His day filled with meetings and calls, but his mind was absent. The voices of his executives blurred into background noise while his thoughts kept circling back. For the first time in years, numbers and contracts failed to hold his attention. He had been a master of control, but now control had slipped through his fingers. That evening, against his better judgment, Alexander found himself walking the same street where he had first seen them. He told himself it was chance but deep. Inside, he knew he was searching. The cafe's warm glow spilled onto the pavement, alive with the chatter of strangers. He stood at the corner, watching, waiting. He felt foolish, like a boy chasing after something fragile, but he couldn't walk away. Then he saw her again. Claire stepped out of the cafe, the girl by her side, holding her hand tightly. They looked simple, almost ordinary, but to Alexander, they seemed like a glimpse of something priceless he had lost. His heart ached with questions he dared not voice. The little girl skipped ahead, giggling as she twirled in the glow of the street lamp. Alexander noticed how Claire's eyes softened when she looked at her, a mix of love and weariness in her gaze. That tenderness stirred something inside him, a longing that stretched beyond lost romance. It was the kind of longing that whispered of family, of belonging, of something deeper than success. Before he could decide what to do, the girl spotted him. Her innocent eyes widened in recognition, and she tugged on her mother's hand. "Mom, that's the man from yesterday," she said with excitement, her voice carrying through the quiet street. Claire froze, her shoulders stiffening. Slowly, she turned, and their eyes met once more. This time there was no hiding. She sighed, softly, as though surrendering to an inevitability she had fought for too long. "Alexander," she said quietly, her voice steady but guarded. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Claire, for a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of years hung between them like a curtain no one dared to touch. The girl, oblivious to the storm of emotions, smiled at him and raised her wrist, the bracelet catching the light. "Do you like it?" she asked innocently. Alexander's chest tightened. "Yes," he whispered, his voice thick. "It's very special." Claire's eyes flickered, and for an instant, he saw the woman he had once loved, the same warmth, the same spark, though now tempered by time and hardship. She took a cautious breath. "We should go," she murmured, gently pulling the girl's hand. But Alexander couldn't let her slip away again. Not this time. His voice came out before he could stop himself. "Claire, please, just give me a moment. We need to talk." She hesitated. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the instinct to protect, the fear of reopening old wounds, but also the flicker of something she couldn't quite hide. Finally, she nodded faintly. The three of them ended up sitting on a bench not far from the cafe. The girl hummed quietly, tracing patterns on her bracelet while her mother and Alexander faced one another with cautious hearts. The air between them was thick with the past, heavy with what had been left unsaid for too long. "Why are you here?" Claire asked softly, her tone carrying both accusation and wonder. After all these years, Alexander let out a slow breath. "I don't know. I wasn't looking for you. But when I saw her," his eyes flicked to the child, then back to her. It felt like life was giving me something I never expected. Claire's expression wavered, as if part of her wanted to believe him, but another part held tightly to her walls. Life doesn't give us things, Alexander, it takes. You should know that better than anyone. Her words stung, but he didn't argue. Instead, he studied her, noticing the strength in her posture, the tiredness hidden behind her eyes. She had endured something, perhaps more than he could imagine, and yet she had not broken. She had built a life, however modest, for herself and her child. The girl interrupted with a giggle, holding up the bracelet again. Mom says this is the most important thing she owns. She said it came from someone who once meant everything to her. She smiled up at Alexander with innocence that cut through the tension like sunlight through clouds. Claire closed her eyes, as if the child's words exposed something she wasn't ready to face. Alexander, on the other hand, felt his chest ache, with a bittersweet mixture of hope and sorrow. That bracelet was more than a memory, it was a bridge between what had been lost and what might still be found. The night pressed around them, quiet and waiting. Alexander knew this was only the beginning. The answers he sought, the truth he feared, and the chance he longed for, they all rested within the fragile connection between the woman he had once loved and the child whose laughter had already begun to heal something deep within him. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, he was willing to follow it, no matter how uncertain, no matter how painful, because in their eyes, he saw not just the past, but the possibility of a future he thought he had lost forever. And in that moment, Alexander realized that some encounters were not coincidences at all. They were destiny's quiet way of giving us another chance. The days that followed stretched longer than usual for Alexander. His business calendar remained packed, but each signature and every meeting felt empty. Shadows of what had once driven him. He had lived so long in a world where victories were measured in numbers, profits, and deals struck across polished tables. Now, he found himself measuring the silence between heartbeats, replaying the sound of a child's laughter in his mind, that bracelet, that smile. Those eyes, they were threads weaving together into a tapestry he couldn't ignore. He knew he should let it go. Walking away would be easier. Claire had made her choice years ago, a choice that left him fractured, and she owed him no explanation now. Yet when he had looked into her eyes on that bench, he hadn't just seen the woman who once broke his heart. He had seen someone carrying battles invisible to the world, battles that made her stronger and more fragile at the same time. And when the little girl spoke of the bracelet with such pride, something inside him stirred that had been dormant for years, a longing not just for love, but for connection, for family. On the third night since their unexpected reunion, Alexander returned to the same street. He told himself it was coincidence, but deep down, he knew it was not. He wanted to see her again, even if only from a distance. The cafe's windows glowed warm, fogging with laughter and conversation inside. He lingered across the street, hidden among the crowd, feeling both like a stranger and a man on the edge of rediscovery. Through the glass, he saw them. Claire sat with the girl, her posture tired yet graceful, her eyes soft as she listened to her daughter chatter between bites of bread. The child's smile was wide, her joy uncontainable, her presence so full of light that even the humdrum of life seemed brighter around her. Alexander's chest ached as he watched them, imagining a life that might have been, one he had once dreamed of but never lived. He was lost in thought when the door opened and the little girl bounded outside, her coat slipping off one shoulder. She nearly collided with him, stopping in her tracks when she recognized him. Her eyes lit up with excitement as she called back into the cafe, "Mom, he's here again." Claire appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to unease. She glanced around quickly, as if unsure whether fate was playing a cruel trick or offering her a fragile gift. She approached slowly, the girl clinging to her hand. "Alexander," she said carefully, her voice carrying both caution and inevitability. He gave a small nod, his throat tight. "I didn't mean to intrude. I couldn't stay away." Claire's eyes softened briefly before hardening again. "You shouldn't be here. Whatever you're searching for, you won't find it with us." Her words struck him like a blow, but he stood his ground. "I'm not searching for anything. I saw the bracelet, Claire, and then I saw her, and everything I thought I knew about the past began to unravel. The girl tilted her head, confusion dancing in her expression. Mom, do you know him? Claire hesitated, caught between silence and truth. Yes, she finally whispered. A long time ago. The child's eyes widened with curiosity, her innocence cutting through. The heavy tension. Is he your friend? Neither answered immediately. The air held too much history for such a simple question. But Alexander, with his heart hammering in his chest, crouched down to meet the girl's eyes. I'd like to be, he said gently, if that's okay. Her smile bloomed. Unbothered by the shadows of the past, she nodded eagerly. I think. You're nice. Claire's lips parted, a breath caught between protest and surrender. Something in her face flickered pain, perhaps, but also the faintest glimmer of relief. For years she had carried the weight alone, protecting her daughter from truths too heavy for her age. And now, here stood the man who had once promised forever, looking at the child with a tenderness she had not expected to see again. They ended up walking together that night, the three of them moving slowly down the street, as though testing the fragile balance of something new. The girl skipped ahead, chattering about school, her favorite books, the dreams she had of becoming an artist. Alexander listened intently, absorbing every word, as though each syllable filled a hollow part of him. He caught himself smiling an unforced, genuine smile he had not felt in years. Claire walked quietly beside him, her guard still raised, though not as firmly as before. When their hands brushed accidentally, she pulled hers back quickly, but not without a tremor that betrayed her composure. Alexander noticed, but he said nothing. Some truths revealed themselves in silence, not words. At one point, the child twirled in front of them, holding up her wrist. Mom says this bracelet is the reason she believes in miracles. She said proudly, Do you believe in miracles? She asked Alexander, her eyes wide with wonder. He paused, struck by the weight of the question. He thought of all the years he had spent drowning in wealth but starving for meaning. He thought of the chance encounter at the cafe, of the woman beside him and the child before him. Finally, he nodded, his voice low but firm. I think I do now. Claire's breath caught, and though she said nothing, her eyes shimmered in the dim light. For the first time, a small crack appeared in the wall she had built around her heart. As the night wore on, Alexander knew he could no longer walk away. Whatever history lay between them, whatever pain had once defined their story, something within him was certain this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something larger than any of them could yet understand. And as he watched the little girl laugh under the glow of the street lamps, Alexander realized that destiny does not always arrive with thunder or grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with a silver bracelet on a child's wrist and a smile that feels like the first sunrise. After years of darkness, he could no longer ignore the pull. The past was demanding answers, the present was offering a fragile chance, and the future, well, the future had never looked so uncertain or so filled with hope. Alexander had faced countless negotiations, battled ruthless competitors, and stood his ground in rooms where billions were at stake. Yet sitting in his penthouse a few nights after walking with Claire and the little girl, he felt more uncertain than he ever had in business. He kept replaying the child's laughter, her innocent question about miracles, and the way Claire's eyes had glimmered with something unspoken when he answered. That look haunted him. It wasn't rejection, but it wasn't acceptance either. It was as if she carried a secret too heavy for words, a secret that pressed between them like an invisible wall. He tried to bury himself in work, but numbers blurred. Contracts grew meaningless, and even the city skyline outside his windows seemed empty. For the first time, Alexander realized that the life he had built so carefully was missing the one thing that mattered most, people to share it with. All his wealth, all his power, all his recognition, none of it could fill the hollow space inside. But a child's smile had cracked it open, and now the emptiness was unbearable. He decided he couldn't keep standing on the edges of their lives, watching from afar. If Claire was going to shut him out, he needed to hear it directly, face to face. He needed answers about the past, and maybe, if destiny was kind, a chance at something more. The following evening, Alexander returned to the cafe, his heart pounding with a nervousness that surprised him. The man who had once walked into boardrooms, without blinking, now hesitated at the threshold of a small, warm place that smelled of coffee and bread. Inside, he spotted them, Claire sitting by the window, her daughter doodling with crayons on a scrap of paper. The sight was disarmingly ordinary, and yet to him, it felt extraordinary. When he entered, Claire's eyes lifted, and for a moment, he thought she might walk out. But she didn't. She exhaled slowly, her expression a mixture of resignation and something softer. Though carefully guarded, the little girl spotted him and waved with a grin. "You came back." Her joy loosened some of the tension, and before Claire could stop her, the child beckoned him over. Alexander approached cautiously, as though every step risked breaking a fragile glass floor. "Would you like to sit with us?" the girl asked brightly, her innocence creating a space that even her mother couldn't immediately close. Claire hesitated, then gave a small nod. Alexander sat, his heart racing, the bracelet catching his eye again as the girl lifted her wrist to show him the drawings she had made. He admired them with genuine wonder, complimenting her creativity, and she beamed as if he had given her the world. As the child returned to her sketches, Alexander and Claire sat in silence. Finally, she broke it. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was low, almost weary. "Why keep showing up, Alexander? You don't owe me anything." He met her gaze, steady but vulnerable. "Maybe I don't, but when I saw you that night, when I saw her, I realized how much of my life has been built on walls. I'm tired of walls, Claire. I need to understand. I need to know what happened. And I need to know why she's wearing the bracelet I gave you." Her eyes flickered with pain, and for a moment, she looked away. The little girl hummed to herself, oblivious, and Claire folded her hands tightly in her lap. "That bracelet," she said softly, "was the only thing I kept when I left. It was the only piece of you I could hold onto when everything else fell apart. When she was old enough, I gave it to her, not because of you, but because it reminded me of strength, even in the hardest times." Alexander's throat tightened. "Then she is?" He couldn't finish the question. Claire's lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Instead, she glanced at her daughter, who looked up with wide eyes and announced, "Mom says you can tell a lot about someone by how they look at you. I think you look at us like we're important." Her innocent words cut through the silence like a light breaking into a dark room. Claire closed her eyes briefly, as if steadying herself, while Alexander felt something stir so deeply within him it frightened him. "Because you are," he whispered. The child smiled and went back to her drawing, but Claire's eyes were fixed on him now, sharp and unreadable. "Be careful, Alexander," she murmured. "She doesn't need promises that can be broken." Her warning landed heavy, but instead of retreating, he leaned forward, his voice steady with a conviction he hadn't felt in years. "Then I won't break them." The air grew thick again, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Claire studied him, as though searching for cracks in his determination. For years she had carried the weight alone, protecting her child from disappointment, shielding her heart from old wounds. And now here was the man who had once shattered her world, sitting across from her with eyes full of a longing she couldn't ignore. The night ended quietly, without dramatic revelations, but Alexander walked away with something he hadn't had before, a sense that the door wasn't entirely closed. Claire might not have said the words, but her silence had not been rejection. It had been hesitation, the kind that only exists when part of you wants to believe again. As he stepped back into the cold night, Alexander realized the story between them was far from over. The past was still a wound, the present was fragile, but the future felt alive with possibility. And though Claire had warned him to be careful, he knew in his heart that some things were worth the risk. Because sometimes, the very things we fear most are the things that can save us. Alexander woke the next morning with a strange restlessness that no amount of coffee or routine could quiet. He had gone to bed replaying Claire's words, "Be careful, she doesn't need promises that can be broken," and the caution in her eyes stayed with him like a shadow. But there was something else too, something that made his pulse quicken with a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. Possibility, for the first time. The future did not look like another sterile contract or empty victory. It looked like laughter, like second chances, like a life that might finally mean something. He couldn't ignore the thought anymore. The child was not just a coincidence. The bracelet, her smile, the way she reminded him of things he couldn't put into words, it was all too much to dismiss. He needed to know the truth. But truth was dangerous, especially when it had been hidden for so long. Over the next few days, he found himself balancing between the world he had built and the world he was stepping into. In the boardroom, he spoke of numbers, but in his mind, he heard the child's giggle. At lavish dinners, he smiled for cameras, but behind his eyes, he saw Claire's guarded expression. Every polished event only highlighted how hollow his life had become without them. Unable to resist, Alexander reached out again. He asked Claire if they could meet just the two of them, away from the bright eyes of her daughter. For a long time, she hesitated, replying to his messages with silence. But finally, she agreed. They chose a quiet park, one far from the bustling streets, where the sound of leaves rustling in the wind drowned out the noise of the city. When she arrived, bundled against the cool evening air, Alexander felt a rush of memories flood him. Years hadn't erased the way she carried herself, poised but cautious, fragile but unbreakable. They walked side by side, saying little at first, their footsteps crunching softly against the path. Finally, he broke the silence. "Claire, I need to understand. Why did you leave back then? Why without a word? Without giving me the chance to fight for us?" Her expression tightened. She stopped walking, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Because I had to," she whispered. "Because sometimes love isn't enough when the world around you is tearing it apart." He frowned. "That doesn't explain why you disappeared completely. You owed me." He stopped, his voice faltering. "No, you didn't owe me. But I thought what we had was worth more than silence." Claire's eyes glistened in the dim light. "Do you think it was easy for me?" she asked, her voice trembling with both strength and pain. "I loved you, Alexander. I loved you more than anything. But I also knew your world. I saw what it was doing to you. You were becoming someone I barely recognized, chasing success, drowning in ambition. I was afraid there would be no space for me, for us, for what I carried inside me." His breath caught. "What you carried." Her lips parted, and for a moment, he thought she would say it, the truth he had been circling around since that first night outside the cafe. But instead, she shook her head, blinking back tears. "It doesn't matter anymore. That chapter is over. I built a life for her, Alexander, one without your world in it, and I can't let you undo that." Her words cut deep, but he couldn't ignore the tremor in her voice, the way her defenses cracked when she mentioned her daughter. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Claire, you can try to close the door, but you can't erase what's real. I see her. I see the way she smiles, the way she carries herself. And I see you in her. Don't tell me it's just coincidence." Her silence was louder than any denial. She turned her face away, and in that refusal, Alexander found confirmation he both longed for and feared. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly, almost brokenly. "Why didn't you let me be there?" Claire's shoulders shook, but her voice came steady, though heavy with sorrow. "Because I was afraid. Afraid you would choose your empire over us. Afraid you'd resent me for changing your life. Afraid you wouldn't want her." His chest tightened with anguish. "How could you believe that? If I had known." He stopped, realizing the years that had already slipped through his fingers. The words "if I had known" felt cruel now, like a wound that could never truly heal. They walked again in silence, the weight of truth pressing between them. Claire's every step seemed burdened, but she didn't run from him this time. For Alexander, that small mercy was enough to keep hope alive. When they reached the edge of the park, she turned to him with weary eyes. "Alexander, you need to understand something. My daughter is my entire world. Her safety, her happiness, they're all that matter to me. If you want to be part of her life, you need to prove that you're not just here because of a bracelet or a burst of nostalgia. You need to show that you'll stay. Because I can't." Her voice broke, and she steadied herself. "I can't let her fall in love with the idea of you, only for you to disappear again." Her words hit him harder than any rejection. She wasn't shutting him out completely, she was giving him a chance, but a chance that came with a responsibility greater than anything he had ever faced. Alexander met her gaze, his own voice firm. "I don't want to disappear. I don't want to be another ghost in her life or in yours. If you let me, I'll prove it." Claire studied him for a long time, her silence a test he had to endure. Then she nodded faintly, almost reluctantly. "We'll see," she said as she walked away that night, her figure disappearing into the glow of the street lamps. Alexander felt both a weight and a fire inside him. The truth had finally cracked open, revealing the pain of the past and the fragile hope of what could be. For the first time, he understood that the hardest battles were not fought in boardrooms or against competitors. They were fought in the heart against pride, fear, and the ghosts of yesterday. And as the wind whispered through the trees, he knew one thing for certain: his life was no longer his alone. Whether Claire admitted it fully or not, that little girl was his, and he would fight, not with power or wealth, but with something stronger. He would fight with love. The following days felt like a test Alexander hadn't prepared for. In business, he knew how to win. Strategy, precision, and persistence had always been his allies. But in this fragile space with Claire and her daughter, there were no clear rules, no guarantees, only the uncertain steps of trust and patience. Each moment mattered, not because of power, but because of presence, and presence was something he had denied himself for years. He began with small things. Instead of appearing with expensive gifts or grand gestures, he offered his time. He walked with them after school, listening as the little girl chattered about her drawings and dreams. He helped her carry her books, made her laugh with clumsy impressions, and answered her endless questions with a patience that surprised even him. Each time she slipped her tiny hand into his, something inside him healed. The hollow spaces of his life began to fill, not with wealth or accolades, but with something priceless. Belonging. Claire remained cautious. She watched him closely, her eyes never fully softening, though they no longer burned with suspicion. She had lived too long protecting her daughter to let her guard down easily. Yet she could not ignore the way her child's face lit up around him, or how Alexander's attention was never distracted by the world he once put first. It unsettled her, this possibility of change, but it also tugged at the parts of her heart she thought had gone silent. One afternoon, the girl insisted they all visit the park together. She ran ahead, her laughter ringing across the open field, while Alexander and Claire followed at a slower pace. For a moment, they simply walked in silence, the sun setting in shades of gold and rose above them. It felt strangely natural, as if the years between them hadn't been filled with heartbreak and silence. Finally, Claire spoke. "She likes you," she said quietly. Watching her daughter twirl in the distance, Alexander swallowed, his voice low. "And I like her more than I ever imagined possible." Claire's eyes lingered on him, searching. "This isn't easy for me. Every step we take closer, I wonder if I'm making a mistake. If I let her believe in you, and you walk away." She trailed off, her voice trembling. He stopped, turning to face her. "I won't walk away. Not this time, not ever. I can't change the years we lost, Claire. But I can choose what I do with the years ahead. And I choose you. I choose her." Her lips parted, as though the words pressed against her defenses, threatening to break through. But before she could answer, the little girl came running back, her bracelet glinting in the fading light. She threw her arms around both of them, laughing breathlessly. "We look like a family," she declared. The innocence of her joy cut through everything: doubt, fear, pride. Claire's eyes filled with tears, and Alexander felt his chest tighten with a mix of grief and hope. He placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "That's because we are." The words hung in the air, fragile but powerful. Claire's tears spilled, and she turned away. But Alexander could see the battle inside her, the fight between pain from the past and the fragile hope of a future. That night, after they returned home, Claire lingered by the doorway as her daughter fell asleep, clutching her drawings. She looked at Alexander, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you really believe we could start again, after everything?" He stepped closer, not with the arrogance of a man who conquered worlds, but with the humility of someone who had lost and finally understood the value of what was at stake. "I don't just believe it, Claire, I need it. Not because of what we were, but because of what we still can be." For the first time in years, she didn't push him away. Her shoulders trembled, her defenses lowering, and she let herself rest in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, love could survive the ruins of the past. The days that followed became their slow rebuilding. There were no instant fixes, no dramatic turnarounds, only small steps, shared meals, honest conversations, laughter breaking through walls of hesitation. Alexander learned that love wasn't about perfection or grand gestures, but about showing up, again and again, even when it was hard. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, the little girl sat between them with her sketchbook. She drew 3 figures holding hands beneath a sky full of stars. She looked up proudly and announced, "This is us, we're together now." Claire's hand trembled as she touched the page, her eyes glistening. Alexander looked at the drawing, then at them both, and felt the weight of years finally lift from his chest. He realized then that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to build a new future, one step at a time. And in that quiet, rain-soaked night, with laughter and tears mingling in the warmth of a small home, Alexander understood the truth he had been running from all along. Wealth could fill rooms, but love filled lives, and sometimes the most valuable treasures were not found in vaults or contracts, but in the simple miracle of a second chance. The bracelet still shone on the girl's wrist, but now it meant something more. It was no longer just a reminder of what was lost, it was a symbol of what had been found. And as Alexander held onto the fragile, beautiful present he had been given, one thought stayed with him, a thought that echoed with hope. Some stories don't end when we think they do. They wait, patient and silent, for the moment when hearts are ready to begin again.